Hey math enthusiast, I'm here to continue the notes on perimeter, circumference, and area. Let's take a look at number 7 to get started. So immediately I see they're talking about the area of a triangle. It's 48 square inches. And they specifically tell me the height, which is 16. And I'm looking to figure out what is the base of that triangle. So let's start with our formula for the area of a triangle. I know it's 1/2 base times height. Now they specifically tell me my height is 16 inches. So I already have that down. And they also tell me that my area is 48 inches squared, or square inches. So let's take this information, my height and my area, and plug it into my formula. So now my formula should read 48 for my area is equal to 1/2 base times height, which in this case is 16. Now, it might help to rearrange your equation since it's all multiplication on that right-hand side. I could actually rewrite it as 48 equals 1/2 16 times the base. That makes it a little bit easier because I know I can multiply these two terms together. 1/2 times 16, or half of 16, is going to give me 8. So we still have 48 for my area is equal to 8 times whatever the base is. And that's what I'm trying to solve for. So now to get b by itself, I just want to get rid of that 8. So it looks like in this case, b, or in other words, my base, is going to be equal to 6 inches. Now the next problem is very similar, but now they're talking about the area of a rectangle. So I know from my notes from earlier that the area of a rectangle is equal to length times width. And they specifically tell me in this case my area is equal to 144 square meters. And I'll wait to add units till my final answer. Now they go on to say that the length of the rectangle is 3 times whatever its width is. So they don't give me any specific values. But I can use that information to help solve for the length and the width. So let's think about a couple examples. If my width were 2, my length would be 6. Or if my width were 10, my length would be 30. But I don't just want to guess and check, so instead let's use a variable. So let's call our width x. Well, we've already determined that the length is going to be 3 times that amount, so I'm going to call my length 3x. So now I have all the information I need. So let's go back to our formula on the left, and let's plug in everything we have. So for our area, we're given that 144 square meters. For our length, I just figured that out. We're going to call that 3x, 3 times the width, and our width is just x. Now I should be able to solve this equation. Now remember, when you're multiplying these two together, x times x is going to give you x squared. So on the right hand side I end up with 3x squared, and on the left I still have 144. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of that 3, which gives me 48 equal to x squared, and the last thing I want to do to get x by itself is just take the square root on both sides. Now in this case, 48 is not a perfect square, so what I'm going to want to do is try to break that down if I can. Now factors of 48 would be 16 and 3, and square root of 16 is going to simplify down to 4. So I end up with 4 square root of 3, or 4 radical 3, as my x value. So now I'm going to go back and plug that in for x. Well, since my width was just w, that's going to turn into 4 radical 3. And now for my length, it's going to be 3 times x. So let's replace that x with 4 radical 3, which is going to be 3 times 4 radical 3. And after I simplify that, I can really only multiply the numbers on the outside, 3 and 4, which will give me 12 radical 3 for my length. And then the units they were using were meters, so I'll fill that in at the end. Now, the last thing I can do to just check my work is just plug these two into my formula. So for the length, we said it was 12 radical 3, and for the width, we said it was 4 radical 3. Now, when multiplying these two together, I'll multiply the numbers on the outside together, 12 times 4, and I'll multiply the numbers under the radical together. So I'll have this big radical with 3 times 3. Now when I go to simplify that, I'm going to end up with 48 times radical 9, which is really just going to turn into 3, and 48 times 3 is going to give me 144. For these next couple examples, I'm trying to convert into different units. So for 9a, they're starting me in inches squared, and I'm trying to convert that to feet squared. Well, first let's just think about inches into feet. So 1 foot is equal to 12 inches. Now I want to think about what's going to happen when I square that. So 1 foot squared is going to be how many inches squared? So as I said, if we have 1 foot, let's say this is 1 foot right here, it's the same as 12 inches, right? Now all of a sudden when I go to square this, I'm thinking, all right, so if I have this square that is 1 foot by 1 foot, how many inches would be inside here? Okay, well we can easily convert my length and my width. That would be 12 inches by 12 inches, which means that the area inside is 1 foot squared, but we could also say that it's 144 inches squared, because it would be 12 times 12 inches. So now that I have my conversion rate, let's see if we can use that to figure out how many feet squared would be equal to 18 inches squared. So right now I know 144 square inches, or inches squared, is the same as 1 foot squared. So what I'm going to do then is set this equal to the ratio of 18 inches squared over, let's use our variable x, feet squared. So now to solve this proportion, all I have to do is cross multiply. So obviously I'm going to end up with 144x equals 18. So lastly, let's just divide. $18 divided by 144 is going to give me 0.125. And that's my final answer. So for 9b, let's start off the same way. Now I'm going from feet squared to yards squared. So I want to think about, how do I make these two equal? Well, instead of thinking about the squares, let's go back and just think about one-dimensional. So 1 yard is going to be equal to 3 feet. So if I had a yard here, it's my 1 yard, same length as 3 feet. Well, now I want to think about, okay, well, what if I had 1 yard squared? What would that be equal to? So here's my 1 yard squared. And I want to think about turning that into feet squared. Well, in this case, I know my length and my width would both be 3 feet. So now my area inside of this 1 yard squared would actually be equal to 9 feet squared. Because what I'm doing is multiplying the length times the width. So now that I have my conversion rate, let's set up our proportion. So we already determined that 9 feet squared is comparable to 1 yard squared. And let's set that equal to the 585 feet squared that they're asking about over x yards squared, because that's what I'm trying to figure out. So we'll solve it the same way I solved the other one earlier. I'm just going to cross multiply, which is going to give me 9x equals 585, which gives me 65. So my final answer is 65 square yards, or yards squared.